Right. So again, welcome back to another Hot Topic Tuesday. Before we get started, I want to remind you of two things. One, no Hot Topic Tuesday next week. Instead, that will be the Lunch and Learn, and our own head coach and coach Alex Peck and Dawn Hendricks are going to be handling that next week and talking about the steps to building your business. So be with them next week, and you'll see a great program that's going to go on with that. So today, we're going to keep going on with the aspect of understanding agency and how that works in the state of Michigan. And so there's a couple of things that I thought would be important for us probably to review that we addressed last week. So we know when we pull out, come on, work for me, I'm going to do it that way, that we must disclose in any residential transaction, lease or sale, 1 to 4 family. We have to disclose to all parties what our agency relationship is. Inform then just simply does explain that, even starting with what a landlord's agent is. Then tenants, agents, dual agent, transaction coordinator, what designated agency is. Describes all of them. We talked about the aspect of a sub-agent, even with the aspect of it saying that that individual acts as an agent of the seller, also interacting as a sub-agent. So we talked about the aspect of that was the reason that we want to offer zero compensation to a sub-agent. We don't want somebody who we've never trained, that hasn't understood to the level that we do. We don't want them representing our seller and dragging us into any of their, we'll call it, inept ways. So again, we offer zero to that individual. You know what? Now I know why this is out here. I pulled up the wrong one. So guys, just pretend that this says seller's agent. This is one that I've got the wrong form, but it would be seller's agent. Seller's agent, limited service, it would be buyer's agent. But in the end, it's hitting the primary things that I want you to be able to see, which again, what we know is when we're here, we are a designated agency office, a designated agency company. And is there anybody out there who's going, I don't understand? You need to pipe up or put it in the chat that I don't understand designated agency, but you're going to check off that second box. Silence is affirmative.
That's a box.
Darwin, did you say, is there anybody that doesn't understand what designated agency is? Is that what you're saying?
Was a, whoops, I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, can you hear me all right? It's Bill.
Yep.
I said, was your question, is there anybody that does not understand designated agency?
Yes. Yeah, I want to make sure, because that was one that we did cover last week, was the designated agency. Let me do a quick review on it. Thanks. I'm going to hit that just real quick. Why we have this is HRC is a non-living entity. So this non-living entity has 18 offices. And in there, each of those offices, they have a lot of agents. So if you will, over here we have our Clinton Township office, because you spoke up, Bill. And over here, we have our Manistee office. Well, here in general is what, if we were not a designated agency company, what it says is that when Bill over here took a listing, because he knows everything, the broker, then this non-living entity knows everything. And because that broker with his office knows everything, everyone within this office knows everything that Bill knows. Let me say that again. Within the office, it says, because Bill took this listing and knows all of this confidential information that he does, that the broker knows, and therefore because this non-living entity knows everything that Bill knows, everyone in the office would know. That's if we were not doing designated agency. But it's that reason that we do designated agency. Again, if we were not, everybody in the office would be needing to know everything that Bill knows because HRC knows it. But oh, by the way, I brought up, BNC over here, and their 10 agents, because Bill knows, therefore the non-living entity knows, therefore everybody in every office within the company would be needing to know everything that he knows, and they would be representing that seller. So we do designated agency, so that Bill is appointed or designated to represent this seller, and therefore Bill is the only one who represents the seller. No one else represents the seller anywhere in the company, and it's because we practice designated agency. So we cannot, when we do the disclosures, leave that blank open or check the one underneath. We have to check that we are a designated agency company. Hopefully that helps out a lot. Okay, so that was one of the big clarifications for last week. Now, let me go back to the form, even though it's the wrong one. It's going to do the same thing. This section right here is another one where commonly we're finding that people are not completing it correctly. And actually, if you really read it, it's really clear as what it says. The undersigned does or does not have an agency relationship with any other realtor. Okay, do they or don't they? And then it says, if you do, it's because I'm represented. Now this one is a landlord-tenant disclosure. However, the one that we commonly use would be a seller-buyer. Okay, so it's saying that if they did have an agreement, what are they represented as? So the example that I use is I got a couple that's referred to me from Cadillac. The agent up there has their house listed. When I'm trying to now find them a house here, I say, by the way, do you have any other contract? And they go, well, yeah, I actually have a contract signed with the agent up there in Cadillac. Therefore, I check, does have an agency relationship, and it would be as a seller, which simply tells us we can go ahead and represent them as a buyer, or if it was landlord, that it could be a tenant. That's all that that's there for. And of course, obviously, we need to do the disclosure, and if we are representing, then here's what we know. It needs to follow with the buyer agency contract. If I say I represent you, I must immediately follow it with the exclusive buyer agency contract. Before I move to that, there was one other thing that, again, for many, was a good point of clarification. In the multiple listing service, whichever one you may belong to, you're gonna have something that basically says sub-agent, buyer agent, or non-agent, which
Your dad, welcome back in.
transaction coordinator,
Okay.
okay? In there,
If you want some, I can pick, I mean, we can go out there and pick you some.
okay, we got it. Good, okay, so in there it says, I want you guys to keep fighting for your commission. We're seeing a lot often where it's less than this, but it states whatever they're going to offer. What we discussed was do 0 to a sub-agent. And again, the reason we want to sever any tie to that sub-agent, to that agent, in any of the mistakes or errors that they could make. We don't want to be tied to it. It becomes the bottom line. So we offer 0. We'll offer a full compensation to a buyer's agent. And this was one which kind of surprised some people. Offer a full compensation to a transaction coordinator. And it was interesting because I'm looking at Paul here, and it was kind of a revelation there. Revelation. It's like many of us think in a way there was like, wait a minute, why would I ever give them a full commission? They're only doing a partial job. Well, are they? Or are they still doing a full transaction? Are they still offering full services? Because what we have to separate is the aspect of what is my agency relationship to them and what am I able to do from what I'm able to do without an agency relationship. Go ahead, Paul.
And just let me clarify where the light bulb, kind
Here, we're
of.
gonna make sure everybody can hear us.
So the light bulb kind of went off for me because I had thought, well, I'm just a transaction coordinator. I'm not listing the house. I'm not, interacting. I'm not doing, I'm not on the strike side. As a buyer, a transaction coordinator, I'm not doing any of that, either the sell side or the buy side. So why should I give someone who is basically going to keep it for 1%? But that was explained that sometimes buyers are reluctant to sign the buyer agency contract. And in those situations, then we, in fact, they need to be a transaction coordinator. And we want to make sure that they are incentivized to have their 3% purchase out.
That's it.
The flip side then was, there are times when you're, okay, so you have to explain it again. I had acted as simply a transaction.
Like when somebody
coordinator.
comes and says, okay.
Somebody came to me and said, I have, I'm a buyer, but I have the seller, I know the house I'm gonna buy. I only want you to do the paperwork.
So here's the first part. I'll be more visual with what Paula just described and what got her to where she went, okay, I get it. The first one is what we potentially between us and a buyer may force them into. We're saying you cannot come in as a sub-agent. We'll allow you to come in as a buyer's agent. But what if the buyer says, no, I don't want to be forced into representation. I don't want that. We just eliminated 2 options on how an agent can get compensated. What's left over is what we, by not offering sub-agency, and the buyer by saying, no, I won't sign a contract, it's what we force an agent to do so that they can bring us a buyer and be compensated fairly. And look, the only thing is, they're no longer representing the buyer. But they can't do the things that they could if the buyer would have allowed them to represent them. But they're still going to do everything to be able to get the transaction closed. See, they'll still put together the purchase agreement. They're still going to work with them in getting this thing to the closing, although they'll still be there with them when they do their inspection. They're going to do all of that stuff. So that was the first part that really was the clarification for Paula. Well, here's the other situation now.
Mine is a vacancy.
Have we or will we ever run into this? We have a buyer, we have a seller. There's no agent involved at this point. Let me do this again, so that that's actually seen better. These two get together, they come up with an agreement, and they go, hey, Paula, we've got this all figured out. It's all, everything's negotiated. We just need somebody to put it on paper and close it. Now, if you haven't had it, if you're in the business, you will. It's going to happen. And we'll typically do that for a lower percentage. But what we receive as compensation for it needn't be determined upon, it needn't determine our type of agency. Just because this is what we're doing, everybody always figures that means, well, I'm a transaction coordinator. My question is, one of these people came to you. One of those people came to you most likely because you have a relationship with them, or what we always talk about, it's part of your sphere of influence. One of those two parties came to you. My thought is always this. You're probably going to represent one of those two parties. So why not do it? If the seller came to you and said, hey, Paula, I found this buyer, we've already got everything negotiated, why not represent them? You're going to anyway. And if the buyer came to you, said, hey, Paula, I found this house, we want to buy it, we'll represent the buyer. More than likely, whoever came to you is the individual who's going to compensate you anyway. So that's the basic thought between this, but this is my humble but educated opinion. And it's based on a lot of knowledge, a lot of classes, and in particular, one experience. We had somebody who had this particular situation, and the seller came to her and said, I put together this transaction to sell my house. This gal's going to pay cash. She's given me a $30,000 earnest money deposit. It was simple in putting it all together, but then trying to get it to close.
Excuse me,
Yes, go
can you
ahead,
have
Lydia.
Irene, Darren?
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Would you have Irene mute herself?
I'm going to see, Irene, if you're listening, and you can get that before I do, and just mute yourself, that would be wonderful. I think you just got a little bit of background noise in there. I think you're set. Thank you. All right. So with that, she had a transaction all put together, moving toward closing, does an inspection, things they don't like, and all of a sudden the buyer wants to walk. And by the way, I believe, I can't remember exactly what it was, but for some reason she couldn't walk. per the contract. So now all of a sudden the buyer's going, well, then I get the $30,000. Does the buyer want to give up $30,000? Now there's a whole big fight, and then on top of it, in the end, we avoided court. But there was a whole lot of work that went into this. And had we represented one of the parties, we probably would have structured this agreement a little bit differently than what they had actually agreed upon. But we almost ended up in court because of what they negotiated, and all we did was put in paper. But because we went in as a transaction coordinator, can we give any advice, guidance, direction? Not really. I mean, it's just, again, it's that fine, where do you go when you make recommendations? Because if you make a recommendation that benefits one of the other parties, or just one party, you just practice an agency relationship, you lean, and therefore you became. So my guidance, we're going to represent somebody. What I want you to do is you have a very skilled, knowledgeable, and wonderful broker manager taking care of it. When you have something like this, work with them and find out what they think is accurate. Okay? Great stuff. That was one of the real clear reviews that this just brought it out that much further. So guys, do me a favor again, put it in the chat. This is open today as to what we're doing. I'm going to go back with the screen share. We're going to take a look at the buyer representation contract. And we're going to take a look at how quickly this half hour is flying by. So I don't do what we did last week. Here's the buyer agency contract. So it simply says that here's the two parties to this contract. And within that then, it says here's the purpose of it. And it states, we are designating this agent listed above to be the
Darren.
buyer.
Darren,
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question. So we're now forcing people to be either buyer's agents or transaction coordinators. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. And so whenever I see a Century 21 listing, I should never ever see 3% going to a sub-agent. Is that correct?
That would be our guidance, yes.
Okay. In the case of someone who's working with a rental, are we having them be a buyer's agent as well?
It would be a tenant's agent.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry?
So in the case of leasing,
Yes.
it would be a tenant agency. There actually is a disclosure, the one that I showed earlier, actually is a landlord-tenant agency disclosure.
Okay.
But
got
if
it.
you use the standard one, that also will still work. And you'd be a buyer's agent.
Okay.
It's
So
really
for
just-
me,
Hey, I
this is
represent-
quite a departure from what we've been taught before, because everybody got 3%. And I think the last listens I did give everybody 3%, or disclose that I would give everybody 3%. So I was actually doing it incorrectly.
Well, I won't say that you were doing it incorrectly. You were doing with what you knew, but it's one of the reasons that we're doing these types of things, because
Right.
it's what I can discover in dealing with the managers, dealing with the mentees, and finding out where we may be missing. And this was a key area that I knew we'd always have to do, and may have to do more of, because it's not just understanding agency, but how we as a company should operate, knowing and understand agency as we do. So,
Okay, thank
yeah,
you.
no, you're okay with it, but it's really a point for us, Lydia. It's a point of protection, so that we can, again, sever any tie between us as a broker and our sellers and the buyers, or the agent, I'll say, working with the buyer. But we are forcing them to either come in as a buyer's agent or as a transaction coordinator. And that's back to why we'll do 0, 3, 3, or if you come up with something, but just offer a full compensation. All right, so again, exclusive right to sell or right to represent, real simple document. Again, the aspect that it is designating you who's working with the buyer, we as the broker are designating you to represent that buyer or that tenant. And then from there, acknowledges that the broker is not acting attorney, you know, that disclosure thing. The term. This is one where I'm going to tell you that on the buyer's agency contract, keep it shorter. Unless, you can tell I got the look in here, unless it has to be a seller who's going to become a buyer. Well, then we'll put those two contracts running simultaneously together. But I don't know that I want to tell a buyer it's going to take 6 months to find them a home. I don't want to give them that expectation. So I might go 6 weeks on it. Because if we find them a home within 6 weeks and it takes another 6 weeks for it to close, we've already earned our compensation. That's all that has to happen, is that we've earned it prior to, that the contract is in place prior to the contract expiring. So look at a shorter time frame with that, because it can always be extended. And by the way, if they're a buyer, and that's a key, then I'm going to have to sign the contract. And there's a lot that as we continue to move forward with career development, we'll talk more about how to work with buyers, and this will make more and more sense. Now, compensation. Don't be afraid to state that you're going to get compensated. But I want you to see with the way this is written, the way our buyer representation contract states, the broker shall be compensated by the seller or the listing broker. We went to a court of law. I don't know which way this would go. Because if we say that we get 3 and they're only offering 2.5, could we pursue the 3? I don't know an answer to that. Because it says essentially, we'll take whatever they're giving us. It doesn't necessarily give us the opportunity to go after additional. So I would foresee that in the future, we're going to be rewriting this paragraph. But in the event compensation is not paid by the seller or the listing brokers, all parties hereby agree that compensation will be paid by the buyers in the following format, of which you put your 3% in there, or a bottom line dollar amount, which is pretty rare if we have that, but it's possible. Okay. Otherwise, it's a flat fee. Matter of fact, it could be the scenario, Paul, that we were talking about earlier, where it's, you know, a buyer comes to us and says, oh, we could put just a flat fee in there.
So you're saying cut a number.
You could,
Okay.
but we're almost always going to have the 3%. Okay. Confidential information. It's saying that the designated agent, the supervisory broker, is going to preserve that. But it also says, hey, buyer, you need to know in paragraph 5 that I may be representing other buyers who want to see the same home that you want to see. Would that be? Ooh, I'm gonna throw one out for conversation here. This would be a great discussion within the office. Would that be dual agency? What?
If you
So are you?
2 buyers?
Yeah, if you got 2 buyers whom you represent, that's not a conflict of interest to where maybe you have confidential information about an individual that you can't share with another one?
You asked if it was dual agency.
Yeah.
It's known a dual agency. Is it a conflict?
Could it be? Well, what is dual agency?
Dual agency is when you're representing the seller and the buyer.
Ah, thank you for participating. Here's what's going on in the conversation, either within your head, within the group that you're with right now. Dual agency is when a seller that I represent comes together with the buyer I represent. Is that really the only time it's dual agency? Yes, I'm trying to create a little bit of conversation. Are we representing two or more parties in the same transaction? Isn't that really what we've described? A seller whom we represent, a buyer whom we represent. Well, what happens when we have, let me be visual, and by the way, this is an interesting one for conversation within the office.
Wow. Now, this is a, our back end.
Here's what I'm doing.
This is a.
Here's this house, and here's a buyer, and here's a buyer. I like it, and I like it too. Okay, well, hey, what did Paula put on her price? Can I tell him? Well, why not? Because I represent both of these parties. Is this not the same transaction? Aren't they involved in all I can tell you guys is just hope that you never run into it, but if you're in this business for a while, you're going to.
You gotta treat them both.
Better go talk to your broker when this comes out. That your manager is going to say, hey, do we agree to disclose? I don't know if they're going to tell you that you need to disclose. You probably wouldn't use the dual agency disclosure form that we have because it's always written for that one specific purpose, that it's a buyer I represent with a seller I represent. But I represent now two buyers to the same transaction. How do I handle that?
So this is called, maybe this is an ethics discussion.
Ethics, it's law, right? Because I literally have two parties I represent who want the same house.
Darwin?
There.
Darwin?
Yeah, go ahead.
Joseph White.
Yeah, go ahead.
But like you said, you know, you could have two buyers and one of the buyers is going to offer more money. You know, how do you know, I don't know how you're going to weigh that out.
Let me pretend this was the can. I will tell you, every time that this occurs, I thought of different ways that you may handle something like this. I would, in simple, I would do this. I go, LaToya, you need to know, I represent Val also. She's going to be looking at the house. Okay? I've at least disclosed, right? I didn't do it in writing, but I've at least disclosed it. And then what I hope is LaToya loves it and Val hates it. Now I've got it all set. I don't have to worry about it. But what if, and it will happen, both LaToya and Val love it, and both of them want to make offers. Now what do? Well, I'm over Clinton. You're going to have to talk to your managers about that. And I bet it is, yes.
Because you could get one buyer asking, what's the other buyer going to offer?
Go ahead again.
You're going to have one buyer might ask you, well, what's your other buyer going to offer? And then, you know, so they're trying to find out if they should offer $100 more than the buyer I'm representing, the other buyer.
Yeah. So here's where the discussion comes in. So I went, what are you going to do? What a great discussion to have as a team at one of your upcoming meetings with your broker manager. I can come up with a couple of different suggestions. It doesn't mean that you're right, but it's just one that, yeah, I think you need to be prepared to know what you're going to do when it does come up. But it could be as simple as I might write for LaToya and I go, Paula, would you take care of Val? Just I'll pay you some money just to take care of her so that she writes an offer. Okay. And by the way, now does Paula have to do a disclosure? Yes. Should I make sure that they both know that I'm representing both? Yeah. I'm going to go, good luck to one of the two of you because Paula's written and I've got yours and we're just gonna submit those once it's all set, and if one of you are fortunate enough to get it, then I'm gonna take care of you the rest of the way. Is that the right way? I don't know. I don't know. Great discussion for you within your office. There's no doubt about it. Yeah, you don't want to be negotiating with yourself. And that's a great point, because that's what you would be doing. And man, I can't imagine knowing what LaToya put on paper and then with working with Val, knowing that, okay, this is a waste of my time because hers is not going to be accepted and I can't tell her what she needs to do. Oh, what a fun thing that we have there.
May I make a quick comment?
Oh, I guess so.
Can you hear me okay? My service isn't great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I, in those cases, keep it very simple. I've actually had up to 4 buyers writing offers on the same house at the same time. And I very simply, 4 at the same time. Yep. On a house I had listed.
Oh,
So
so really parties to the same transaction.
correct. So what I did is I just always keep it very simple. And the fact is that I have agency with each of those people. And I just let them know that I am very professional and confidential in the way that I handle my business. And all I can do is ask them to present their best offer. If they have questions, I'll answer their questions, but that I wouldn't give them a heads up over anybody else because they would want me to treat them professionally and fairly the same way. And usually that works just fine.
And you have to give all parties the same information. So if you did comps, you give the same set of comps to all 4 buyers and the seller. They
Correct.
get the same thing. So good,
Yep,
good input.
Just be fair and honest and keep your morals in check and you're good to go.
Caroline, you just brought one up that I would hope I never have happened 2 in the same was bad enough. 5? Ouch. All right, guys, let's just see, is there anything else in this contract that I need you to know? Here, just know that conflict of interest, and this is where, Paula, it says conflict of interest, but it's saying dual agency. Broker shall act as a disclosed dual agent of both the buyer and seller. Oh, by the way, in this scenario then, if you will, it's this. Remember we said here's HRC at the top, and they have all the office, and here's the office, and there's all the agents and this agent. Well, obviously, the broker, it's the broker's contract. It's their listing that this agent did on behalf of HRC. And then there's this buyer over here who came over to say, I want to buy that house. Well, the broker obviously represents them, even if it's a different office. So that broker, the non-living entity, and the supervisory broker, basically your manager, represent both. But you have, if you had not just the buyer, but you had the listing, you are now a dual agent, and you must redisclose. A redisclosure, a disclosure that says, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I represent you and I represent the seller. And I go and I get signatures from both stating that I've redisclosed. But just know that this is talking right here, that it's the broker themselves. And of course, we all know non-discrimination. Don't do anything that you could even think could be misconstrued as discrimination of any of the protected classes. And know what is local, because there's many things that are local that you have to make sure you don't do. Of course, this addresses the aspect of the broker compliance fee. So you have that. And if you, no, I'm not going to bring that up. We just don't have time for it. So guys, I know we're over time and thought it could potentially go this way again. But let me ask if there's any other questions. You guys can take yourself off mute and I will address anything that we can. Joseph says thumbs up. I have questions here. Ms. Val?
What if your lister, your seller, doesn't want to sign the dual agency
Oh,
when you have a buyer?
here's one for you. I've never had it, but the question was this: what happens if the seller says, I don't want you acting as a disclosed dual agent? You don't want me to bring the buyer to your home? You don't want to sell it? By the way, that would be the question I would ask. Because if you think about it, if they say, I don't want you doing that. Well, you understand, I already do represent them. And you're saying, I don't want you to represent them, but I already do. So even then, I have to disclose that it's dual agency, because even if I let them go, it doesn't change the confidentiality. And it's a lot easier for me to work with me than it is with somebody else. But essentially what they would be forcing you to do, you still have to disclose, you represented them at one time. Oh, wow. I got to bring one up quick. But they'd be forcing you to do still, and then give it to somebody else to represent them so that you can sell the house. Okay? But Paula, hold that thought, because I've got to bring this up. I want you to think of this. Have you ever gone out on a listing appointment? Obviously, you've disclosed to the seller or acted as if you were representing them. Virtually every time we go out, that's what we're doing, right? We're going out, acting as if I'm going to represent you. I'm interviewing for the job. I gained a whole lot of confidential information, right? And why they selected somebody else, I don't know. But they did. And a week later, you come across the buyer. And you go show them that house. Ugh. But Darwin, I never signed a contract. Did you gain confidential information? Can you give it to the seller? By the way, sorry, managers. You gotta think of these things, because you did represent them. Are you now a dual agent? If so, we're supposed to disclose. You implied you were gonna represent them. They gave you confidential information. So now, by the way, you got confidential from both parties. Okay, there's one other question, guys, and I know we're over. If you gotta go, you gotta go. We'll get this done.
Opposite of Val,
Uh-huh.
which is, if you do a double dip and you have let that buyer know that you're a seller's agent, what are you?
So a double dip, okay, that one's easy. Did you represent the buyer?
Well, no, the buyer came and wanted to buy the house and he wasn't
Okay.
represented.
Did we cover this last week? That situation? Okay, so here's where, guys, where we're at. And if you gotta go, I understand. I hate to leave you guys hanging with questions, I guess is the way that I would put it. So we'll keep rolling, but if you gotta go, know that I'm gonna get this up as quick as possible so that you're gonna be able to review the whole thing if you've gotta go. So here essentially is the question. I have a listing and it's on Agent A, we'll call it. I took this listing, obviously I'm designated to represent the seller, right? So then what ended up happening would be this. I hold an open house on this listing. My listing, I represent, I'm holding it open. Along comes Mr. and Mrs. Buyer to the open house. They do the We want to buy it. Do you represent the buyer? What say you? Ah, I like it, John. My guidance is this: do not represent the buyer. You have a single agency relationship owed only to that seller. If you represented this buyer or you forced the buyer to be represented by you, you now will minimize what you currently owe the seller. I have a relationship, I have none. So we,
You're not
and
even-
here would be the key.
You're not even a transaction coordinator.
We're not even a transaction coordinator. I've already disclosed to this person, I represent you. To this person, what do I check off on the disclosure? You guys can't answer, I'm gonna leave it to Latoya. What do you disclose? Well, whom do you represent? I'm a seller's agent. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, you need to know I represent the seller. So I simply check off. Matter of fact, you know the only difference between this disclosure and this one? The signature. That's the only difference. Otherwise, they're filled out exactly the same.
So I do owe the buyer a disclosure.
Yes. Question was, or statement was confirmation. Yes, we do owe the buyer a agency disclosure. Our law says that prior to the exchange of any confidential information, we will disclose in writing our relationship to all parties. So all parties get a disclosure as to what the agent's relationships are. Guys, if we kept talking all day, we would find more things to be able to discuss. Let me just check this stack. So there's Caroline, yep, okay. I think we've addressed everything. Guys, any last questions that may have come up? Speak now or forever hold thy peace. I'm guessing that we're good to go then. So guys, again, no hot topic next week. Look for the lunch and learn and get engaged in the office on Wednesday. You've got Alex Peck and Dawn Hendricks who's going to be leading the way. And know that as of yesterday, it's my awareness that there were only 9 spots left for the School of Hard Knocks. You want to participate, get your name in and make sure that it gets reported to your manager who can get it to Sherry Roos ASAP. So I will see you guys actually in a couple of weeks. So I hope you enjoyed another Hot Topic Tuesday. Please bring me what you need, what you're looking for, and we'll put those on to those future Hot Topic Tuesdays. Have a great day, everybody. See ya.